In the late 1800s, the study of the human mind was not about feelings or internal conflict. It was an exercise in rigid mechanical biology. The prevailing scientific community approached psychology strictly by measuring physical responses, cataloging data like nervous system reaction times. Vienna, Austria, sat at the absolute epicenter of this strictly physical medical establishment. Sigmund Freud began his career exactly here. He was a traditional neurologist, analyzing physical brain structures, not a therapist listening to patient trauma. The scientific consensus left no room for abstract psychology. A human being was treated entirely as a predictable biological machine. That rigid mechanical model broke when physicians encountered a medical anomaly known as hysteria. Patients with hysteria suffered severe physical symptoms, temporary paralysis, loss of speech, or sudden blindness. Yet anatomical examinations revealed zero physical cause for their suffering. The medical establishment was totally paralyzed. You cannot dissect or medicate a symptom that has no organic origin. Freud proposed a radical thesis to solve the contradiction. These physical ailments were not originating in the tissue of the body, but leaking upward from a hidden mental basement. The total failure of 19th century medicine to cure hysteria forced science to abandon the purely biological model, creating the direct necessity for depth psychology. The empirical proof for Freud's thesis came from a close colleague, Dr. Joseph Breuer. Breuer was treating a young woman immortalized in the clinical literature as Anna O. She presented with a massive cluster of hysterical symptoms, including severe nervous coughs and partial paralysis, all of which defied conventional medical intervention. The clinical breakthrough occurred entirely by accident. Breuer noticed that when Anna O verbally recalled complex past traumas, her physical symptoms rapidly subsided. She gave this process a highly specific, exam-critical name, the talking cure. Freud adopted this specific case study to establish a new clinical rule. Unexpressed emotional memories do not dissipate. They translate themselves into physical ailments. By demonstrating that verbalizing a memory could physically heal a paralyzed limb, the Anna O case broke the purely biological model of medicine. To map this newly discovered, non-physical mental space, Freud required a structural framework. Freud's topographical model conceptualizes the human mind as an iceberg. Above the waterline is the conscious mind, comprising roughly 10% of your mental activity. Below the surface lies the massive unconscious. This 90% holds all hidden traumas, repressed desires, and forgotten memories. Freud argued that this submerged region, not the conscious intellect, is the actual driver of human behavior and the origin point of hysterical symptoms. Because this model places the vast majority of mental life beyond our immediate awareness, Freud concluded that the reasons we provide for our own behavior are often just surface-level observations of much deeper, hidden impulses. Once the topographical map was established, Freud developed the structural model to explain exactly what forces were interacting inside that iceberg. This visual maps three intersecting agents onto the iceberg: the id, the ego, and the superego. Located entirely within the deep unconscious is the id, which operates exclusively on the pleasure principle. The id is purely primitive, demanding immediate gratification for biological urges without regard for logic. Spanning both conscious and unconscious regions is the superego, your strict internal moral compass enforcing societal norms. Resting on the surface is the ego, acting as the ultimate mediator. The ego attempts to satisfy the id's primal urges, while simultaneously appeasing the strict regulations of the superego. This yields a critical concept for your exams. When these three forces violently clash and the ego struggles to mediate, the resulting psychological friction is anxiety. Psychological stability requires the ego to successfully manage this continuous, invisible war between your primitive drives and your moral constraints. This created a practical clinical problem. How does a therapist extract data from a hidden unconscious that the ego is actively guarding? The first clinical method was free association. The patient speaks in an entirely uninhibited, uncensored stream of consciousness. The goal here is to mentally exhaust the ego's filtering mechanism until a repressed truth eventually slips out of the patient's mouth. The second method was dream analysis. Freud famously defined dreams as, quote, the royal road to the unconscious. He argued that while you sleep, the ego relaxes its guard, allowing the unconscious to express desires safely by disguising them as symbolic imagery. The third method is parapraxis, commonly known as the Freudian slip. When a patient makes a verbal mistake, it is not random. It is the unconscious successfully bypassing the ego to express a suppressed truth. These three techniques converted abstract psychological mapping into an actionable clinical practice, laying down the bedrock of early therapy. Modern science has thoroughly debunked many of Freud's highly specific theories, particularly his ideas regarding rigid family dynamics. However, his move from biological neurology toward the study of the unconscious mind remains a critical historical milestone. Prior to the 1890s, the scientific community did not consider childhood trauma a relevant factor in adult psychological functioning. Post-Freud, the recognition that early life experiences shape the unconscious adult mind became a universal baseline in psychology. If you are preparing for the UGC NET JRF exam, mastering this 1890s timeline and the exact distinctions between the topographical and structural models is vital. Within a single decade, the study of the brain evolved from timing physical reaction speeds to mapping the architecture of human thought. Psychoanalysis forced the scientific world to look inward, permanently establishing our modern understanding of human anxiety and the unseen forces driving our behavior.